Narrator, Isaac Newton, a name shining with the grandeur of science and the cold brilliance of reason. A man whose genius seemed absolute, infallible, in its touch upon the laws of the universe. We see him as an architect of order, a builder of the foundations of classical physics. But what if, behind that rational facade, lay a mind obsessed with far older and darker mysteries? What if the most influential scientist in history was not merely a researcher of nature, but also a deeply immersed mystical interpreter of ancient prophecies? And what if one of his most enigmatic and long-hidden predictions concerns not a distant past, but our own, relentlessly approaching future? Today, we will dare to peer into the most hidden corners of Newton's genius, to ask a question that chills the blood. What if? Isaac Newton predicted the year 2060, and it's not what it seems. And what if his great mind, in attempting to bring order to the divine plan, stumbled upon something beyond mere revival, something that continues to cast the shadow over the horizon of our world? Prepare yourselves, for today we will try not just to unravel, but to feel the echoes of that profound mystery which Newton, perhaps, tried to conceal. Narrator. The image of Newton as an exclusively scientific luminary is only a part, and perhaps not the most complete, of the grand tapestry that was his mind. Yes, he discovered gravity, developed calculus, revolutionized optics. But few know that a significant portion of his life, perhaps even more than pure scientific inquiry, was dedicated to entirely different pursuits. He was an alchemist, a scholar of ancient texts, a theologian who believed that the deepest truths of the cosmos were encrypted not only in the language of mathematics, but also in sacred scriptures. For Newton, there was no separation between science and religion. Both were paths to understanding the singular divine plan. He believed that God had revealed himself both in the book of nature, science, and in the book of scripture, the Bible. He spent decades studying ancient prophecies, attempting to decipher hidden messages and the chronology of the future. Among his numerous manuscripts, which were kept secret for decades after his death and only became widely known in 2003, there was one, dated 1704. In this manuscript, dedicated to the interpretation of biblical prophecies, Newton makes a startling statement about the end of the world, which he asserted would not occur before 2060. Narrator. So how did Newton, with his rigorous scientific mind, arrive at such a seemingly mystical date? It's important to understand that his approach to biblical prophecies was as systematic and logical as his approach to physics. He didn't guess. He sought to apply mathematics and logic to sacred texts, seeing encrypted messages within them. His primary focus was on the book of Daniel in the Old Testament and the book of Revelation in the New Testament. In particular, he paid much attention to Daniel's prophecy of a time, times, and half a time, Daniel 7:25, which he interpreted as 1260 prophetic years. He counted this period from specific historical events, such as the establishment of papal power, which he linked to a period of persecution of the saints. He concluded that the end of times would not arrive before 2060. He used his knowledge of history, mathematics, and biblical chronology to construct a complex dating system. He also dedicated an entire chapter of his work, The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended, to observations on Solomon's Temple. He was fascinated by its sacred proportions, believing that the temple's architectural details contained keys to understanding the divine plan and future events. He believed that the structure of the temple symbolized cosmic order, and perhaps even served as a model for predicting certain historical periods. For him, it wasn't just a building, but a kind of mathematical and prophetic map. But herein lies a key misunderstanding that has misled the public for decades. When word of the 2060 prediction spread throughout the world, it was perceived as just another harbinger of apocalypse, catastrophe, the end. Yet this was precisely not what Isaac Newton intended. Or was he merely trying to convince himself of that? Narrator: Newton maintained that his 2060 prediction was not a prophecy of a catastrophic end of the world and universal destruction. No. He spoke of a spiritual revival and the beginning of a new era, of the second coming of Jesus Christ and the advent of a millennial reign of peace when justice and harmony would prevail. For him, it was a triumph, not a tragedy, a dawn, not a dusk. He was driven not by a desire to frighten, but by an urge to put an end to the hasty conjectures of interpreters who, with their absurd and failed predictions, discredited sacred prophecies. Newton, being a man of science, sought to bring the same rigor and precision to the interpretation of prophecies that he applied to his scientific research. He wanted to show that biblical predictions were not random guesses, but part of a logically constructed, though hidden, divine plan. He provided a lower bound, not a precise date, stating, "I mention this not to predict the time of the end, but to put a stop to the rash conjectures of fanciful men who are frequently predicting the time of the end, and by doing so bring the sacred prophecies into disrepute." For Newton, 2060 was not an end, but a starting point, a point after which a process of global transformation would begin. He saw it as an era of great change, where ignorance and injustice would give way to true knowledge and divine harmony. He believed that during this period, a profound purification of the world would occur, leading to the establishment of a new order based on principles of truth and peace. But, even in his own writings, beneath the layer of mathematical precision and pious interpretation, did not another, darker thought occasionally slip through? Could he, a man who peered behind the veil of the visible, have seen something so grand and terrifying that he preferred to frame it as a spiritual revival? Ancient prophecies are often ambiguous, and the purification of the world can take many forms, sometimes devastating ones. A mystical revival might be just one side of a coin, with chaos preceding the new order on the other. Or was this his way of mitigating the inevitable so as not to plunge the world into panic? This question, like a cold whisper, remained in his manuscripts, unsettling those who dared to read them. Narrator: Isaac Newton's dual legacy, on one hand, the rational scientist, on the other, the deeply mystical and prophecy-driven theologian, compels us to reconsider the very nature of knowledge. What if even the greatest minds of humanity sought answers not only in empirical data, but also in sacred texts, seeing within them another kind of code to reality? Newton's 2060 prediction, even when interpreted as the dawn of a spiritual revival rather than a catastrophe, still carries immense weight. But if we consider the subtle, barely perceptible shadow of a possible end, which he perhaps felt but deliberately withheld, it becomes even more unsettling. What if his insights were so profound that he saw not only the dawn, but also the inevitable night that precedes it? What if we, without realizing it, stand on the precipice of a grand shift in human consciousness, foreseen by a genius who taught us to understand the universe? What if all these millennia of human development have merely been preparation for this great revival? And what if understanding this can give us a unique, albeit unsettling perspective on the challenges we face today? Perhaps the key to our future lies not only in faith in a bright revival, but also in a readiness for a profound transformation that may prove to be far harsher than we can imagine. Right now, in the comments, write just one word or short phrase that reflects your reaction to this idea. Write revival or mystery. This is your small contribution to pondering our future. If this resonated with you, don't just scroll away. Like this video if it awakened the explorer within you. Subscribe to join a community that doesn't just live by the rules, but strives to understand their essence. This is just the beginning.